Oh, welcome once again to our new series here on Living Light Network, The White Owl Reports with Michael Edward, and I'm Michael. We're on a second interview today with Harry Hubbard. If you missed the first one, you better go listen. Just like the subject says here on Blog Talk Radio on Living Light Network, we've got them all posted on our videos, YouTube and Vimeo. Illinois Caves, Lost Tomb of Alexander the Great. Yep, sounds impossible, doesn't it? Sounds like a bunch of hokey pokey, but it isn't. And that's why we're doing this series with Harry Hubbard. He, as I introduced him last week, ancient map collector, historian, explorer, definitely an avid book collector and reader. And as far as I'm concerned, of everything that I've seen with his pictures on the site at IllinoisCaves.com, he is the expert on the Illinois tomb, along with his associated work with him back in the 90s and on and off since then, I'm sure, Paul Shafranki. So we've got Harry back on here again, as we promised last week. This is part 2 of the series. Don't know how long it's going to go, but it's going to go until we get it all out. And sit back, get ready to listen to some real proof as to exactly why this is the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, sitting in southern Illinois in the area they call Little Egypt. And there's no mistake for that name. Harry, great to have you back again.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Super. And I'm kind of excited because we kind of mentioned on the our first part, we were talking towards the end about map stones.
Yes.
And I want to, before you start talking about that, because I want to pick up from that point, anybody who wants to see exactly what we're talking about, go to Harry's site, IllinoisCaves.com, go into the photo section, and the map stones are in there with all these other pictures. And also go and see the videos that Harry has done. And I just want to remind everybody that we're also doing videos. Our producer, Lynn, is doing our videos of these interviews as well. And the pictures and such will be in there that will go along with what we're talking about. So, Harry, talk about the map stones. Are these what prove that this really is the lost tomb of Alexander the Great?
Well, not so much necessarily of who is buried or interred there, but where the actual location of the tomb is. And because there's been a lot of discrepancy through the years. Somebody says it's over here, somebody says it's over here. And when we first started attempting to track down where exactly Burroughs was getting these stones from, we had some eyewitnesses that had been with him out into the woods, into the ravine systems and such, and we, in the dawning stages of us getting heavily involved with this, we figured or hoped that sooner or later the stones themselves would start to open up more and give more information concerning the actual location. And essentially that's what happened. And I saw there's on the IllinoisCaves.com website, if you go to articles, and then from there you go to Ancient American Articles, there is an article titled In Search of Hard Evidence, Ancient Stone Maps, and it's written by William Kreisel and his wife Marilyn. And as a matter of fact, I don't know where they're from. I think they may have been living in Texas at the time. But this man, William Kreisel, who was doing the research, he was employed with the Army Corps of Engineers for like 30 years. Okay, the guy was up on his snuff. He knew geology. He had access to all kinds of satellite records, and first one thing another, the guy he's really brilliant. And Paul and I witnessed his and Marilyn's presentation at the 1995 ISAC conference in Columbus, Georgia. And we were just like blown away. We thought it was great. And we had seen at this time one of what they call the map stones. And he showed two of them, which were different than the one that we saw. And since then, I have seen like 2 or 3 more of these map stones. and they pretty much are all the same.
Now, are they from different areas, or all?
No, they're from Burroughs Cave. That they all came originally from Russell Burroughs, and from this cave he found in Marion County, and they all showed a river system going north, which is obviously the Mississippi. It shows the Arkansas River, the Big Black River, the Missouri River, the Ohio River, Illinois River, on up into the northern Mississippi, and they were all very, very similar. And what became of them, now the ones that I show on the web page, you can't really see so much because of the way that they are inscribed. It's black on a black stone, but the ones that we initially had access to were quite more vivid. But it shows the mouth of the Ohio River into the Mississippi, and bear in mind there's like 5 or 6 of these. And then it shows up the Wabash River. I believe there's a couple of them that actually show the Tennessee River. There's several of them that show Cave-in Rock, and they also show some of the islands in the middle of the Ohio that are pushed up as a delta from certain of the large rivers pushing silt and mud down, such as the Wabash Island that sits at the mouth of the Wabash River, and then up the Little Wabash, and then it shows a symbol for what appears to be a tomb, which is a block with several lines in it. So between the 5, these different stones, it's obvious that this tomb is not up the Embrah River. It is not down in any river in Kentucky. It is not anywhere else except up the Wabash, the Little Wabash, the Skillet Fork, and then somewhere off of the Skillet Fork. It's quite obvious.
The Skillet Fork isn't exactly known too well. So for them to have that kind of detail, and you said this is not just on one. This is, what you said, 4 or 5 that
At
you
least
know
5.
of. Wow.
And the inscriptions on the stone says, stuff like tomb, mouth of the tomb, or opening of the tomb, black, flowing water, stuff like that. Just the inscriptions on the stones are basically one or two simple words. They're not any lengthy.
So within the tombs are these map stones that showed that they were the tomb, and your research has shown that you've tied this into Alexander the Great.
Well, considering that these stones came from Russell Burroughs, and they're on the same black medium as so many of the other stones, they clearly show, several of them clearly show Cave-in Rock with some kind of insignia or mark symbol, rather, for a tomb. It doesn't say on these stones resting place of Alexander or resting place of Cleopatra. They just kind of give a location. And the thing about them is that if you put yourself back into ancient days and you imagine for a moment someone attempting to make a map that is somewhat viewed from the air, these map stones are quite remarkable.
Wow.
We just didn't, but they did have other maps back in the day, but they were heavily researched, and I'm sure that in the Library of Alexandria and in Corinth and in Athens, of these major libraries, that they did have maps, but with their accuracy, back then a map didn't have to be to the detail.
Mm-hmm.
Just a good general overall idea. Such as the map that Paul deciphered, I believe it's on Tomb Tape 4, and I believe it's on the website too, the Beatis River Stone. Well, the Beatis River today is known as the Rio Guadalquivir, and it is quite detailed. It gives a lot more history. It has the river system on one side with all of the villages that were established along the banks of that river. It indicates where Julius Caesar defeated Pompey's last surviving sole ancestor. And then after which, that was Julius Caesar's last victory. After that, he went back to Rome and he was assassinated. So these map stones do give a lot of detail to some degree. Some of them do. And these map stones here were pretty much part of the problem that Burroughs came up with, because then when he started telling people, well, I made all the stones, or the tomb is in Richland County along the Emrah River. Well, these map stones, why would you fake something that gave you away? You know, why would you fake something that put somebody right there where you said something was, et cetera, et cetera? But I believe seriously that Burroughs never thought that anybody was going to crack the code. After 1991 and putting out his book, and the quote-unquote professors of ancient languages could not decipher anything, he was pretty much convinced that everyone was going to give up on him, give up on the stones and his discovery, and he was going to just skip around for the rest of his life selling these stones on the black market, which is what he has still done anyway.
You mentioned that not just one, but all these stones are on a black rock of some type. Is that an indigenous rock that's found in Illinois, or is it from somewhere else?
No, it is not. Scott Walter, who did a History Channel series and has done some articles on these, claims that he found these stones south of Richland County along the banks of the Fox River, I believe it was. And we went there and searching, and those stones are very large. They're more rounded. And these stones have fossils embedded in them and pyrite, and there is no geological evidence that there's ever any pyrite found in Richland County. And the stone that we recovered that was more similar and tested similar came from Italy, from a place called Lavagna. And it makes sense. Lavagna means black stone or blackboard stone. And the ancient Romans used this stone for their chalkboards in schools.
Wow.
As they were in their colleges and universities. And that is what we found. There's only like 4 or 5 fossils that are indigenous to Illinois. It's not a big fossil state. And the fossils that we find in these stones are not recorded as being native to the state of Illinois.
So there's no way then that these map stones, which have these great details of Mississippi and Ohio rivers and even the fork that comes up by the tomb, there's no way those stones came from anywhere near the tomb.
Correct. I'm just sorry I have to say that, and that there is a lot of discrepancy in that I can point out in research of some of the geologists who have done research on these stones. The largest portion of the stones recovered, or that we have pictures of, and that I have actually seen, are this black Lavagna rock. It actually has a name, Lavagna. And
from Italy.
From Italy. And what it was, it's close to an ancient volcano that spewed out this sedimentary type stone that did have fossils and pyrite in them. And it's layered very funny, and it does have a few different shades of discoloration, from light brown to softer black. The lighter the color, the more bisky it is, the more fired it appears. And they appear in Italy in these plate or saucer-like slabs. And you can clearly see by studying these stones that the actual stone itself on the outside and on the faces is not machined to appear saucer-like or like dinner plates. That's how they naturally occur. That's how they naturally occur in Italy. The ones that we found in Richland County are very fat and bowl-like, which there are a few of the larger artifacts that are fat and bowl-like. I'm not saying that there are no stones that Burroughs recovered that couldn't have come from an area around here. We know that some of the calcite came from here. There is some of the pieces that are carved on sandstone that could have very easily come from here. And there are very large statues that weigh over 100 pounds that could have come from somewhere around here. But what we are saying is that the majority of the black inscribed rock that has all these portraits on them, that is in several different phases of hardness, those are the ones that we have proven to my satisfaction came from Italy. I actually paid for a man to get on the train in Rome and take the train to Lavagna, pick me up samples of that Lavagna, and paid for him to FedEx it back to me. And we actually had we had it tested, and I also had an artisan carve a lion into it, and the lion was very good. And then I made him inscribe his name on the bottom of it so that somebody wouldn't think that it was a Lost Pearls cave stone of some sort. And
well,
it was the same specific gravity to it. It had the same exact weight to it. So.
So you're pretty convinced. All right, so that's the map stones, which show pretty detailed mapping. You said there were 5 of them showing the river system and the fork that goes up by the tombs and such. Let's talk about Alexander the Great. You know, this is the Lost Tomb Alexander the Great. So what about the tablets that you show on your site, IllinoisCaves.com? You have pictures of these tablets.
Right.
Give a little history about them and how you and Paul were able to decipher what they said when academia just couldn't seem to get it.
Okay. The first time that I really got a look at a vast array of these artifacts was in November of 1994 as I was videotaping Virginia Horrigan's photo albums. And it started to dawn on me that many of these artifacts were already ancient before they were brought over here.
Wow.
In other words, they were 1,000, 2,000 years old, possibly 500 years old, before they even got here. And so there are different compositions. You have marble, Carrara marble. You have a white, real fine-grained type of limestone. You have a hardened, a couple of different kinds of sandstone. There's calcite. And there are several different composites of the stone, and different things are written on different types of stone. And as Paul started to decipher the stones, and I was cataloging them, and we were able to pull a fantastic story out of the stone. What we gathered from them is that one of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's missing sons from history brought all this over here with the help of his sister and his brother-in-law. His sister was Cleopatra Selene. She was his twin. And his brother-in-law was King Yuba II. So it appears to us that through the stones that Cleopatra at some point whisked the bodies out of Alexandria and put them somewhere for a year or 2 or 3 years. Gosh, we don't know. And then it was later when Alexander Helios put together an armada, or just dozens and dozens, probably over 100 ships, with the help of King Yuba II, and loaded them up and brought them actually over here. So when Cleopatra and Mark Antony were overthrown by Gaius Octavian, he was about 10 years old. And he was taken back to Rome. He was held hostage in the royal palace, along with his sister and his younger brother, Ptolemy Philadelphus. And Cleopatra Selene fell in love with Yuba, the son of Yuba, King Yuba I of Mauritania. Yuba II was also being held hostage in the same palace. And that's what they did in ancient days. They would trade daughters, they would trade wives, and you could pretty much do whatever you wanted to. You just lived in the palace like a dormitory until you were fully Romanized and probably even forgot your own native language. So King Yuba II, we'll just call him Yuba II now, he was a very, very brilliant man. And he distinguished himself highly fighting in the army of Octavian. Again and again and again, he was awarded with medals and such. Fought valiantly. So Yuba asked Octavian for the hand of Cleopatra Selene. They became married. He was many years older than Cleopatra Selene. Both of them's parents had been annihilated, wiped off, martyred, whatever you want to call it, killed. And there began a fantastic love story that we only know bits and pieces of from the artifacts. And later, a little bit later in life, Octavian granted Yuba back his native kingdom, which was Mauritania. And so he went back to Mauritania, was sanctioned as king, and Cleopatra Selene became queen of Mauritania. He traveled a lot through the Mediterranean. He traveled. They know he went to the British Isles. He went to Canary Islands. He traveled and wrote books about Arabia and Parthia, all these countries to the east, countries in North Africa. And his library, his books are pretty much lost. And he was very detailed. He wrote, and we know he wrote an 8-volume set just about elephants. He was the first one to record that elephants had these real low-end, bottomy kind of sounds that are subsonic, that travel through the earth. And in modern-day times, we just discovered that, I believe, in the 70s or 80s, that warning signal travels at a very low subsonic frequency, below the audio level.
This is King Juba II, then, you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we find out just a lot about King Juba II by reading Pliny the Elder, who was writing in the 70 ADs. He writes about King Juba II. Oh, he's brilliant. He's the smartest guy. He knows more about the Atlantic than anyone else. And so King Juba II evidently had enough of the logistical abilities to provide Alexander Helios with ships and people and provisions. And there is soon to be released on the net one of our videos called Etruscan Volume 1. And in Etruscan Volume 1, at the very end of it, this is a plug for the video, but also a plug for your show, too, because people will learn a lot more. And they will see how this language from Old Latin morphed. I've seen on the Internet a lot of comments like, how in the world it's a hard sell to think that people around 0 BC were speaking Etruscan, but what they have to realize is that Etruscan was only a Proto-Latin language. It was Latin, and it became more advanced as time came along. And after 500 years, the same symbols were still being used in vernacular Latin. So at the end of Etruscan Volume 1 video is what we call the Numerius tablet. And Numerius is the guy that writes it, and he talks about that we came from Naples in good ships given to us by the benevolent King Juba II.
Wow.
And it's just a fact. We think it's one of the most important stones. Actually, it's not a stone. That particular inscription is carved on what appears to be a whale bone. It could be some other large, it could be an elephant bone, it could be it's a very large piece of bone. And it says this message carved on bone. But the stone, the medium itself does appear to be black, but it's curved. It does not resemble the majority of the black stones that are inscribed as we generally know these stones are. It is a completely different composite. It is much lighter, but the color of it is black. So, but someone looking at a picture of it would think, well, it's a black stone. But it's bone of some sort. It's either a whale bone or an elephant bone. Someone more rehearsed in anatomy can help out on that. We don't know. But it just says this message carved on bone. et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to give it away because I want them to watch the video. I want them to see Paul's methodology for, number one, breaking the script from Alexander's tomb, and the Etruscan Volume 1 video is actually a play on words, even though we actually teach the layman the Etruscan alphabet and how to decipher anything in Etruscan. It also teaches anyone how to decipher Phoenician. And that's one of the tricks, one of the plays within the Etruscan Volume 1 video. Yes, it does explain Etruscan, but it also goes into very much detail concerning Phoenician.
So now these tablets, they have this Phoenician and Tuscan and this old Latin and such and all this, which you and Paul were able to figure out what it was, and it's all actually related anyway. Where does that prove anything about Alexander the Great? Is there something in there that has his name? And just so that the listeners don't get confused, you talk about Alexander Helios and Alexander the Great. Are they the same? Is that a son? Just kind of explain that real quick.
Well, first of all, I have to tell you it was Paul that is the ancient language master that busted all this. He is the genius behind it. I only learned it from his work. I watched him work. I studied his work for hours and hours and hours. I was with him, but he, knowing and growing up in Europe, he was taught Latin in high school and in grade school. And that's how he was able to break this particular code, this ancient dead language. And so I only picked it up from him, his tutelage. And like you say, the inscriptions go all over the place. You can kind of encompass it in a way saying that it is a Mediterranean vernacular / phonetic way of speaking. Mm-hmm. These people, even though they had grammar and vocabulary, when it comes to writing on a stone, you're going to pull out Greg's shorthand. You know what I'm saying? You're going to abbreviate, and it's going to be noun, verb, noun, verb, noun, verb. Mm-hmm. And part of how Paul broke this is you get like a guy with a portrait, and you've tried to put together a name, a proper pronoun. Mm-hmm. You also perhaps get some of the stones that were a little more complicated. You get a stone that has a picture of an action, and then you look for nouns and verbs. You look for that action in any kind of way. If there's an animal in the picture, you look for any variation from the ancient languages of what that animal was called. And then you go through and separate the consonants and the vowels to find that. You have to go up and down, backwards and forwards, left and right. You have to find that. Some of this is read up and down, some of it's read up, some of it's read down, some of it is read back and forth in Bostrafeden. And that was a problem. A lot of the scholars are trying to read all this ancient language like it was English, from left to right, left to right. And then this was an ancient language, quote-unquote, scholar. He said, well, I never knew of any Greek that was read in Bostrafeden, inscribed in Bostrafeden. Okay, Bostrafeden is a Greek word. So how in the world would the Greeks ever come about with the word for as the ox plows if they didn't have inscriptions of it? And that's the kind of mentality that we've been dealing with for, several years. People who claim to know a lot about ancient languages, really they don't. They've never deciphered anything. They don't know any ancient language, any ancient alphabets for memory. They have not studied the good alphabets, such as the Britannica and L.A. Waddell. Now, Derringer does have some good alphabets, but you're not going to decipher anything using Berry-Fell alphabets. It's just not going to be there. You have to go into the Britannica and L.A. Waddell. Those are the two primary sources of ancient alphabets. And they're very closely related because L.A. Waddell was curator of the British Museum in the early 1920s. He was editor of the Britannica. So he kind of correlates there, where you have the alphabets of L.A. Waddell corresponding very closely with Britannica. They just show more. They're just different sets.
So here you've deciphered these tablets, so to speak, in learning how, like you explained, you've got an animal pictured, and then you find out where that name for that animal is in it, and then you just build up from there, and you start putting it all together. Where does Alexander the Great come into this? Did you actually translate his name? Okay. Talk about that.
The Greek word Alexandros means like falcon of the air. And there was a stone that says basically Bas Alex U Cleo. And then the next step would have been in Greek, modern Greek, or a little bit less than ancient, would be Basileus Alex of Palio, which is King Alexander of Pella.
Okay.
And it has a falcon carved right there on his shirt. There's another one says Bas Alex Vipero, which or Achilles, Bas Achilles Vipero, King Achilles the Viper. And right there on his armor is a snake. So, and then once Paul learned the motifs, the common motifs, Yuba, Helios, there are several. You start looking for these, and they start popping out right at you. And then you know which direction the script. Now, for instance, Paul or myself can look at a tablet and instantly know exactly which direction the script goes. Either it goes up or left to right, right to left, or backwards and forwards. Now, the backwards and forwards, I am not that good at. Paul can look at it and tell you if it goes backwards and forwards. There are some of the stones that actually go up and around and then from the bottom and go both for feet and up and down. Well, heck, how is a modern-day scholar without these, really twisted techniques of ancient writing, how is he going to be? They're not going to have a clue. Case in point is the gladiator stone that is deciphered. Paul deciphers it. It's on the Isaac video. And this was an extremely controversial stone. It was found in Italy. It's clearly written in Etruscan text, and nobody could figure it out in 100 years. I mean, 2,000, 2,500 years. Nobody had a clue of what it said. And they were all reading it from right to left. Left to right instead of right to left. It reads backwards. And when you read it backwards, it makes total perfect sense, exactly what's going on. It is an action tablet. And I highly recommend anyone seeing that. It's on the Isaac excerpts. That is a preliminary to Etruscan Volume 1. And we did that because we knew there were so many people in the audience at the Isaac Conference who had published that stone through the years and tried to make stabs at it.
Well, this was all on your site. I just want to remind everybody, it's on IllinoisCaves.com. Just go in there, look at photos, look at videos. Everything Harry's talking about is there to back up what he's saying, and the pictures don't lie. And as Harry said last week, the great phrase, it's written in stone.
There are a few, we can talk about the more recent stones that have come to light later in a different series. But these stones give us an outline, like they'll say, Ptolemy the First Soter. And the way Paul figured everything out was studying in ancient history, reading about Alexander Helios missing from history, and then deciphering the stone Ptolemy A Soter, which is Ptolemy the First. They use letters for numbers, common. We on a test today, a multiple choice test, you'll have the question, and then you'll have answer A, B, C, D. It won't necessarily be 1, 2, 3, 4. So that concurs. A lot of this is abbreviated, just like archaic Latin is in the books. in actual books that we have. Mm-hmm. And so the story kind of developed between the different decipherments of stones and how Paul was able to lift out certain minuscule details that as more of the little details came to light, we were able to put a bigger picture together. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Didn't just happen overnight. It took a while.
I read your book, and I've read book number 2 you're working on now, and you're revising book number 1, so that's going to be great when all that gets out. But I kind of have a little bit of an insight that I guess others won't have quite as well. You go into a lot of detail, Harry, and that's the good thing, and you break it down exactly in your books, and even what you've got there on IllinoisCaves.com. You break it down where if somebody is a historian or somebody is a language expert, I mean, you and Paul just put it out there simplified. And that's really got to disturb some of the academia who are going, oh, there's no way we can translate that. And here, you guys come up with it, and it's so simple. That's what I love in your one video. You make it look so simple, and it is simple.
Well, thank you. And, we realized at the time that sooner or later our work is going to be published in many different languages all across the planet because people will want to know what happened. So it was necessary to document step by step what happened and make it fun to read, fun to follow, put you in our shoes, make you see what we did from our eyes, our point of view, and to be accepted by the layman and understood by the layman first, and then the scholar would be able to understand it. A lot of times the layman understands things that the scholars do not, simply because the layman has not been so critically institutionalized. Mm-hmm. And the people, for instance, who study Etruscan, I wonder if 200 or 300 years from now, they're still going to be sleeping in their box, wondering, like, well, man, I just can't understand a single word of this Etruscan. And here Paul was busting funerary after funerary after funerary, tablet after tablet, stone after stone after stone, going through all the Etruscan inscriptions, that are recorded anywhere, and he busted all of them. Not only that, but Oscan, Faliscan, and Umbrian. They're all right there from central Italy. They are all right there, Proto-Latin, and they're also very similar.
That's typical modern scholars, and actually modern society. It's not just pick on the scholars. Try to make things more complicated than what they are. And a lot of times we just have to follow that rule, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Might seem kind of odd talking about the tomb of Alexander the Great, but keeping it simple obviously is exactly what got you and Paul to understand what was being said there. So, okay, Harry, we've got on these tablets, map stones, we've got on there Alexander the Great, who is presumed to be where all these were found in southern Illinois. So here's the big question then. How did Alexander the Great get to southern Illinois?
Well, evidently, the family Sema, the Ptolemaic Sema, was somehow removed from Alexandria, probably under the leadership of Cleopatra, and after she died, her body was put with the rest of them, and Alexander Helios in ships by Yuba was brought over here. And how they got to where it is they are within the 38th parallel, I don't know. The 38th parallel seems to have some major significance with all kinds of navigational astronomy, with the latitudes of the Earth. There just seems to be some type of enigma there. There is a lot of discrepancy of how or if this could be Alexander the Great, because so many people, scholars included, believe that he was either that the entire family semen, the mausoleum. When I'm talking about sema, I'm talking about the contents of the mausoleum, the cadavers, dead bodies. Sema sounds better than dead bodies or cadavers, so but I'll try not to use the word.
I'm glad you defined it because I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah, it's S-E-M-A, SEMA. So given that, there are stories that the mausoleum burned down, that Alexander the Great's body burned up, that it was stolen and drugged through the streets of Alexandria, that it was sold off to the highest bidder or this or that. And there is some partial truth to some of it, but not quite the whole story. It begins about the time of Julius Caesar, I believe. The library caught on fire, but it was put out. I believe that there is another classical author that records that the palace caught on fire again after, like 10 years after Cleopatra died, when it was Alexandria was under Roman rule, and a portion of it burned again. And then I believe that it caught on fire again in like the 1st century A.D., and then after that, some of it caught on fire, I think, in 400 or the late 300s A.D. Some parts of it caught on fire. But now, from what we're saying, after Cleopatra died and Rome, Octavian took over Alexandria, these bodies were already out.
What's some of the I know that you've studied a lot of old classic literature and such, and in fact that's your thing, between that and your ancient maps. Is there anybody ever talk about this different than what we're taught in our modern history classes and books? Because I was told that, Alexander the Great, his body and the whole library was burned up, and that's the way that I was taught. But what are some of the ancient historians? Are there any that wrote about this?
Well, yes. And if you go on the IllinoisCaves.com website and you go into articles, and then you go into Ancient American issue 16, you will come across my article that I wrote. It's called The Greatest Discovery in the History of Archaeology, A New History for a New Century. And I detail in there all of the classic authors and what they said about the tomb of Alexander the Great. That it comes in from Strabo. Strabo, for instance, indicates that Alexander's coffin by 7 BC, Strabo writes that it was an alabaster with a glass top. And he says that the scarlet Ptolemy, melted the gold down for coinage to pay the army. Well, there's only one Ptolemy that would be scarlet. Scarlet would be the word red. Scarlet would be identifying a woman, and that would have to be Cleopatra VII.
Wow. Which
makes total sense. And then Strabo's also writing about that she was a lover of the outsider who came in. Well, it's got to be Mark Antony. Describes it totally. And then you have Dio Cassius, who records a lot of what happened concerning the children of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And then you have Suetonius, who's writing about the Caesars, and he's the one that we get a lot of the famous quotes, "I came here to see a king, not a bunch of dead bodies." That's what Octavian says. And he writes and says that, and Octavian touched the nose of Alexander, and I guess it crumbled or whatever. But that same word in Greek can mean that Octavian struck or hit the nose of Alexander. Well, why would he do that? Well, we think that maybe he thought he realized that he'd been biffed out. That maybe that wasn't. He realized that it wasn't the actual body of Alexander the Great, and he hit it in the face. So it's possible. That's just speculation. We don't have any proof. So, and then we have Septimius Severus writing, and he is recorded as saying, or it's a classical author who says that Septimius Severus, who was, let me think, when was he? Septimius Severus, I believe, was emperor in the late 2nd century A.D., like 190s up to 210 or something, off the cuff, 210 A.D., that Septimius Severus took the tomb of Alexander the Great and locked it up, or locked it up within. It's very generalized, but there's indication there that Alexander, his tomb, was still around during Septimius Severus in 200 A.D. Okay, let's just assume that that's partly true, that there were relics there, or took the remains or what was left of it and locked it up. Well, Septimius Severus has a son. His oldest son was Caracalla. And Caracalla became emperor of Rome in 211 or so, something like that, reigned for not very long, 5 or 6 years. And he was like an incredible warrior, very powerful, but he had a couple of screws loose. Well, most Roman emperors were missing, a couple of screws. And Caracalla, for his army, they said he's recorded in one of the classical authors. It escapes me at the moment, as riding through his troops, holding up a gold chalice that he says comes from the tomb of Alexander the Great. Now, it could have been a gold chalice that actually did come from the tomb of Alexander the Great. It could have been a gold chalice that was carved to mimic a facsimile, if you will, of Alexander the Great, or it could have just been something fake that he had hammered out by some goldsmith in Alexandria. We don't know. And the people that say that Alexander the Great's bones were taken and strewn about the streets of Alexandria. This is Russell Burroughs' classic. Once he realized that it was Alexander the Great's tomb, and he knew it, and it was proven to him, it was about 3, 4, 5, 6 months after that he started coming out saying it couldn't be because his bones were strewn up and down the street. He just started making up the old story or reciting the story that the scholars were. But there is no classical proof at all that Alexander the Great's bones were strewn up and just cast away. Because you have to see and still remember, it wasn't just Alexander the Great that was buried in the family mausoleum. He was the featured cadaver, but it was all of the Ptolemies. So did they just take all of these bones? Well, heck, that's a pickup truck load of human bones, and just throw them out on the street. People picking their teeth with Ptolemy Euergetes or Ptolemy Philopator.
Well, that wasn't happening. So
no, exactly. So when you put the whole story together, it really doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And of what a lot of the scholars say, and the ones that poo-poo our research, they have nothing else to back it up other than just hearsay and speculation.
Well, it's always been a mystery, since no one is being cited as saying, they removed Alexander the Great and all the other tombs.
Correct.
Nobody is in classic literature had said exactly what happened. So it's always been the great mystery. What happened to the tomb of Alexander the Great?
Right. Correct. And the way the classical authors typically research is, they will tell you who went in, took the bones. They would tell you all the bones that they took, and then they would tell you what they did with it and what year it was. So, and there, like I say, unless there was something that we have overlooked, there's nothing that we've overlooked, and if there is some information that has been lost for all time, we still don't have it. But like I repeat, we have no classical references whatsoever that occurred.
So the big mystery really is the tomb of Alexander the Great, along with the Ptolemy family, Cleopatra, the whole works. These tombs just kind of disappeared.
Yes.
And history, classics, they're not coming up with any answers, because apparently The mystery is just disappeared. We know the library burned, as you said, a few times, and that's what I was taught. But when it comes to Alexander the Great, where his tomb really is, nobody has really known, and that's that missing part of history. Again, the big mystery that the tomb disappeared. It had to, because nobody wrote about it still being there, and nobody wrote about anybody breaking in there and destroying the bones, or as you said, throwing them around. Nobody has ever written anything like that. So, it kind of fits in, Harry, that with all these tablets and the writing that you and especially Paul have translated and figured out, we've got Alexander the Great written on these stones. We've got people look at the photos on your site. They'll see like the soldier with the armor, and I forgot what you called it. I thought there was a phoenix on the one. What was the bird?
There's all kinds of birds.
Okay.
There's owls, everything from owls to falcons to eagles to doves. And I'm hoping that soon the powers that be that are handling the website will put up some more of the pictures of the artifacts, because they're like the website itself is probably, I would say, 1/20th or less of the artifact, the pictures that we actually do have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've got my producer, Lynn. I think that she's helping out on that, and I just want to remind everybody that these interviews will also be on video, and that will be on your site, IllinoisCaves.com. It will be on livinglightnetwork.org, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other places. Be on YouTube, on your Illinois Cave channel.
And I would like to thank your producer, Lynn Bailey, for all the hard work that she's done recently, and also the lady that works with her, Shoshana, these ladies have done just a tremendous job of helping getting this out. And let's face it, Michael, we could not have done this without their help. We could not.
Oh, that's for sure. I know that every single day.
I'm learning it too, pretty quick. So.
Well, we're just about running out of our hour here, Harry. Wow, more proof. This is just astounding. It's really difficult to find words. Here, I'm fortunate enough to have gone over all these photos, some of them that weren't put up on your site yet, as you just mentioned. I've been able to read the 2 books, which aren't out there for the public yet. Harry, it's amazing. It's just got so much detail in what you've written, what Paul translated. There's so much about this, and the more I look, the more I read, Harry, and I have to go over, because you've got so much detail. I have to go over and over and over.
How many times did you read book 2?
Book 2 I did twice because you kept flashing back in there, and you'd be talking about something, go, well, okay, there's a little flashback. The reason that that came about is because of this, and that's what I'm saying. Talk about detail. Everybody knows and will know once you get these out and published for the public. They're going to understand everything about the Illinois Caves, which is really the Illinois tomb. And I believe last week you mentioned there were 15 different internments in there, different bodies, basically. You had that fancy word for that. It really is amazing and awesome for me to be able to dig into this after you spent so much time researching it. And here I guess we've all convinced you, especially those 2 ladies you mentioned, and I hope myself to push you into coming out of semi-retirement when it comes to Alexander the Great's tomb, and letting us really get out there, because you know what, I think people are ready to find out what real history is, and you got a big chunk of it, Harry, a big chunk.
Well, thank you. And I believe that to a point, some of our other videos that are not tomb related at all will kind of give people an idea of where Paul and I are coming from, and the kind of research that we do and how we do research from the core up. or from the bottom up. You know, we have to start someplace and have to go to another place and then circle back around. And that's pretty much, that gives the viewer or the listener or the interested researcher a good idea of just who we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No doubt. No doubt. Okay, well, this is the end of our hour, part 2, and I've been with Harry Hubbard, the historian, explorer, ancient map collector, researcher, and, as I said in the beginning, the expert on the Illinois tombs, which is the Lost Tomb Alexander the Great. We're going to go on to part 3, so hang in there and learn and get to Harry's site, IllinoisCaves.com. Harry, again, it's been great, and can't wait for the next show.
Me too.
Okay, we'll catch you then. And again, to everybody, get on there, look at Harry's pictures that he took some of them, another lady had taken some. Go on there, IllinoisCaves.com. And if you're going to do anything, just look at the pictures. If you're really interested, like you should be, and you want to see how these tablets were deciphered and such, get on there and look at his videos. He has a new video page on there, real easy to get through. So that's it for this time. Thanks for joining in with me on this new White Owl Reports that I'm doing from now on. I'm Michael Edward. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again. We'll catch you next time around.
He was up on his snuff. He knew geology. He had access to all kinds of satellite records, and first one thing another. The guy he's really brilliant. And Paul and I witnessed his and Marilyn's presentation at the 1995 ISAC conference in Columbus, Georgia, and we were just like blown away. We thought it was great. And we had seen at this time one of what they call the map stones. And he showed 2 of them, which were different than the one that we saw. And since then, I have seen like 2 or 3 more of these map stones, and they pretty much are all the same.
Now, are they from different areas or all?
No, they're from Burroughs Cave. That they all came originally from Russell Burroughs. And from this cave he found in Marion County. And they all showed a river system going north, which is obviously the Mississippi. It shows the Arkansas River, the Big Black River, the Missouri River, the Ohio River, Illinois River, on up into the northern Mississippi. And they were all very, very similar. And what became of them, now the ones that I show on the web page, you can't really see so much because of the way that they are inscribed. It's black on a black stone, but the ones that we initially had access to were quite more vivid. But it shows the mouth of the Ohio River into the Mississippi, and bear in mind there's like 5 or 6 of these. And then it shows up the Wabash River. I believe there's a couple of them that actually show the Tennessee River. There's several of them that show Cave-in Rock, and they also show some of the islands in the middle of the Ohio that are
exactly what we're talking about. Go to Harry's site, IllinoisCaves.com. Go into the photos section, and the map stones are in there with all these other pictures. And also go and see the videos that Harry has done. And I just want to remind everybody that we're also doing videos. Our producer, Lynn, is doing our videos of these interviews as well. And the pictures and such will be in there that will go along with what we're talking about. So, Harry, talk about the map stones. Are these what prove that this really is lost tomb of Alexander the Great?
Well, not so much necessarily of who is buried or interred there, but where the actual location of the tomb is. And because there's been a lot of discrepancy through the years. Somebody says it's over here, somebody says it's over here, over here. And when we first started attempting to track down where exactly Burroughs was getting these stones from, we had some eyewitnesses that had been with him out into the woods, into the ravine systems and such. And we, in the dawning stages of us getting heavily involved with this, we figured or hoped that sooner or later the stones themselves would start to open up more and give more information concerning the actual location. And essentially that's what happened. And I saw there's on the IllinoisCaves.com website, if you go to articles, and then from there you go to Ancient American Articles, there is an article titled In Search of Hard Evidence, Ancient Stone Maps, and it's written by William Kreisel and his wife Marilyn. And as a matter of fact, I don't know where they're from. I think they may have been living in Texas at the time. But this man, William Kreisel, who was doing the research, he was employed with the Army Corps of Engineers for like 30 years. Okay, the guy, ancient days. And you imagine for a moment someone attempting to make a map that is somewhat viewed from the air. These map stones are quite remarkable.
Wow.
We just didn't, but they did have other maps back in the day, but they were heavily researched, and I'm sure that in the Library of Alexandria and in Corinth and in Athens, of these major libraries, that they did have maps, but with their accuracy, back then a map didn't have to be to the detail.
Mm-hmm.
Just a good general overall idea. Such as the map that Paul deciphered, I believe it's on Tomb Tape 4, and I believe it's on the website too, the Beatis River Stone. Well, the Beatis River today is known as the Rio Guadalquivir, and it is quite detailed. It gives a lot more history. It has the river system on one side with all of the villages that were established along the banks of that river. It indicates where Julius Caesar defeated Pompey's last surviving sole ancestor. And then after which, that was Julius Caesar's last victory. After that, he went back to Rome and he was assassinated. So these map stones do give a lot of detail to some degree. Some of them do. And these map stones here were pretty much part of the problem that Burroughs came up with, because then when he started telling people, well, I made all the stones, or the tomb is in Richland County along the Emrah River. Well, these map stones, why would you fake something that gave you away? You know, why would you fake something that put somebody right there where you said something was, et cetera, et cetera? But I believe seriously that Burroughs never thought that anybody was going to crack the code. After 1991 and putting out his book,
Oh, welcome once again to our new series here on Living Light Network, The White Owl Reports with Michael Edward, and I'm Michael. We're on a second interview today with Harry Hubbard. If you missed the first one, you better go listen. Just like the subject says here on Blog Talk Radio on Living Light Network, we've got them all posted on our videos, YouTube and Vimeo. Illinois Caves, Lost Tomb of Alexander the Great. Yep, sounds impossible, doesn't it? Sounds like a bunch of hokey pokey, but it isn't, and that's why we're doing this series with Harry Hubbard. As I introduced him last week, ancient map collector, historian, explorer, definitely an avid book collector and reader, and as far as I'm concerned, of everything that I've seen with his pictures on a site at IllinoisCaves.com, he is the expert on the Illinois tomb, along with his associated work with him, back in the 90s, and on and off since then, I'm sure, Paul Shafranky. So we've got Harry back on here again, as we promised last week. This is part 2 of the series. Don't know how long it's going to go, but it's going to go until we get it all out. And sit back, get ready to listen to some real proof as to exactly why this is the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, sitting in southern Illinois, in the area they call Little Egypt. And there's no mistake for that name. Harry, great to have you back again.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Super. And I'm kind of excited because we kind of mentioned on the our first part, we were talking towards the end about map stones.
Yes.
And I want to, before you start talking about that, because I want to pick up from that point, anybody who wants to see
are pushed up as a delta from certain of the large rivers pushing silt and mud down, such as the Wabash Island that sits at the mouth of the Wabash River, and then up the Little Wabash, and then it shows a symbol for what appears to be a tomb, which is a block with several lines in it. So between the 5, these different stones, it's obvious that this tomb is not up the Embrah River. It is not down in any river in Kentucky. It is not anywhere else except up the Wabash, the Little Wabash, the Skillet Fork, and then somewhere off of the Skillet Fork. It's quite obvious.
The Skillet Fork isn't exactly known too well. So for them to have that kind of detail, and you said this is not just on one. This is, what you said, 4 or 5 that
at
you
least
know of.
5.
Wow.
And the inscriptions on the stone says, stuff like tomb, mouth of the tomb, or opening of the tomb, black, flowing water, stuff like that. Just one. The inscriptions on the stones are basically one or two simple words. They're not any lengthy.
So within the tombs are these map stones that showed that they were the tomb, and your research has shown that you've tied this into Alexander the Great.
Well, considering that these stones came from Russell Burroughs, and they're on the same black medium as so many of the other stones, they clearly show, several of them clearly show cave-in rock with some kind of insignia or mark symbol, rather, for a tomb. It doesn't say on these stones resting place of Alexander or resting place of Cleopatra. They just kind of give a location. And the thing about them is that if you put yourself back into